By 11 a.m. that same morning, I'd be on the phone with my estate attorney, transferring $3.7 million from my secret inheritance into a trust fund that would benefit every resident of Sunset Manor, except my son Richard would never see a penny of it. All because he had dumped me in this understaffed, roach-infested facility, thinking I was a broke, helpless widow he could abandon without consequences. Before we dive into this incredible story of family betrayal and the $8.2 million inheritance my son never knew existed, make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and subscribe so you never miss stories like this one. Trust me, you're going to want to see what happens when someone assumes their elderly parent is financially helpless while secretly sitting on a fortune that could change everything. My name is Margaret Thompson. I'm 73 years old, and this story begins 6 months ago when I made what seemed like a reasonable decision to keep my unexpected inheritance private while I figured out how to handle the windfall, a decision that would reveal my son's true character, and teach me the most expensive lesson about family loyalty when you're perceived as vulnerable versus when you hold all the financial power. But to understand how I ended up abandoned in the worst nursing home in Phoenix while secretly controlling more wealth than my son could imagine, you need to know who I was before a surprise inheritance changed everything, and before my son's assumptions about my financial helplessness led him to make the most costly mistake of his life. For 42 years, I was Margaret Thompson, head librarian at Phoenix Central Library, one of Arizona's most respected public library systems. I didn't just check out books and organize shelves. I managed digital archives for over 500,000 historical documents, coordinated community education programs that served 35,000 residents annually, supervised a staff of 18 full-time librarians and 12 part-time assistants, and built literacy initiatives that provided free computer training, job search assistance, and educational support across the Phoenix metropolitan area. My position wasn't just administrative. I was responsible for a $2.8 million annual budget that funded everything from new book acquisitions and technology upgrades to community outreach, programs and educational partnerships with local schools. I managed vendor relationships, negotiated contracts with digital database providers, and implemented systems that modernized library services while maintaining the personal touch that made our branches community gathering places rather than just book repositories. The Phoenix Central Library System included 12 branch locations across the valley, each serving different demographic communities with specialized programs and services. I oversaw the coordination between branches, ensuring that resources were distributed equitably and that each location could provide comprehensive services regardless of the economic status of their surrounding neighborhoods. My expertise in information management led to consulting opportunities with other library systems across Arizona, New Mexico, and Nevada. I helped small rural libraries implement digital catalog systems, trained staff in advanced research techniques, and developed grant proposals that secured federal funding for underserved communities that couldn't afford modern library technology. But more importantly, my career provided the steady income and excellent benefits that allowed me to raise my son Richard as a single mother, after my husband Frank died in a construction accident when Richard was only 8 years old. Frank's death in 1987 wasn't just an emotional catastrophe. It was a financial crisis that required immediate and strategic planning to ensure Richard's stability and future opportunities. Frank had been earning $38,000 annually as a commercial construction supervisor, and his sudden death reduced our household income by nearly 2/3, while simultaneously creating new expenses related to funeral costs, legal proceedings, and the practical challenges of single parenthood. The life insurance payout of $50,000 seemed substantial in 1987, but it represented our entire financial safety net for Richard's childhood and my future security. Every decision I made about that money would determine whether Richard would have stable housing, adequate health care, educational opportunities, and the emotional security that children need to thrive after losing a parent. I was 35 years old. suddenly widowed, working full-time at a demanding job while raising a grieving 8-year-old who had lost his father during the most formative years of his development. Every choice I made was focused on providing Richard with stability, security, and the resources he would need to build a successful adult life despite the trauma of early loss. My approach to managing Frank's life insurance was methodical and conservative. I used $27,000 to pay off our mortgage completely, eliminating our largest monthly expense and ensuring that Richard would always have stable housing, regardless of economic changes, job losses, or unexpected expenses that might arise during his childhood and adolescence. Owning our home outright reduced our monthly living expenses from $1,450 to $685, covering utilities, property taxes, and basic maintenance costs. This financial breathing room was crucial because my librarian salary of $32,000 annually had to cover everything else: groceries, clothing, healthcare copays, transportation, school supplies, and the countless expenses associated with raising an active child. The remaining $23,000 from Frank's insurance was invested conservatively in a mix of certificates of deposit and mutual funds that would grow slowly but steadily over time. I wasn't sophisticated about investing, but I understood the importance of preserving principal while achieving modest growth that would outpace inflation and provide long-term security. But financial planning was only part of the challenge. Richard was dealing with grief, anger, and the confusion that comes with losing a parent at such a young age. He needed counseling, emotional support, and the kind of consistent presence that helps children process trauma and develop healthy coping mechanisms. The library job provided excellent health insurance that covered Richard's medical needs, dental care, and the psychological counseling he needed to work through his grief. The predictable schedule allowed me to be present for school conferences, little league games, homework help, and the daily routines that provide stability for children dealing with family trauma. More importantly, working at the library exposed Richard to educational resources and learning opportunities that enhanced his academic development. He spent afternoons at the library while I finished work, completing homework in quiet study areas, accessing research materials for school projects, and developing reading habits that would serve him throughout his educational career. Reading opens doors to opportunities you can't even imagine yet, I would tell Richard when encouraging his academic interests. Your father and I always believed that education was the key to building whatever kind of life you want to create. My financial strategy extended beyond just managing Frank's insurance money. Every small raise, every annual bonus, every tax refund was carefully allocated between emergency savings and Richard's college fund that I had established within 6 months of Frank's death. I was determined that Frank's death would not prevent Richard from accessing higher education or limit his career opportunities due to financial constraints. By 1995, when Richard entered high school, I had been promoted to assistant head librarian, with a salary of $41,000 annually. The increase allowed me to accelerate contributions to Richard's college fund while maintaining our modest but comfortable lifestyle. We weren't wealthy, but we weren't struggling. Richard participated in school activities, had the clothing and equipment he needed for sports, and enjoyed the occasional family vacation to Flagstaff or San Diego. During Richard's high school years, I began researching college funding strategies, scholarship opportunities, and financial aid programs that could supplement the college fund I had been building since Frank's death. My goal was to ensure that Richard could attend any university that accepted him without being limited by financial considerations or burdened with excessive student loans. I want you to choose your college based on the quality of education and the opportunities it provides, I told Richard during his junior year when we began visiting campuses. Financial concerns shouldn't limit your dreams or force you to settle for less than the best education you can access. By the time Richard graduated high school in 1999, I had accumulated $52,000 in his college fund. enough to cover 4 years of in-state tuition at Arizona State University, with minimal student loans required for living expenses, books, and incidental costs. This represented 12 years of disciplined saving and financial sacrifice that had sometimes meant delaying home repairs, driving older cars, and choosing budget-conscious vacation options. But the sacrifice was worth it when Richard graduated from ASU in 2003 with a business degree and only $8,000 in student loans, a remarkably low debt burden that gave him flexibility to pursue internships, entry-level positions, and career opportunities without the financial pressure that burdens many college graduates. "Mom, I know you sacrificed a lot to make this possible," Richard told me during his graduation celebration. "I promise I'll build the kind of career that makes all your hard work worthwhile." I was proud of providing Richard with this educational foundation and hopeful that his business degree would lead to the stable, successful career that Frank and I had always envisioned for our son. Richard was intelligent, articulate, and ambitious, qualities that suggested he would build the kind of professional life that would provide security for his own future family. After Richard's graduation, I continued working at the library for another 15 years, gradually advancing to head librarian in 2008. And seeing my salary increase to $52,000 annually by the time I retired in 2018 at age 65. My retirement planning had been conservative but consistent, maximizing contributions to my pension fund, maintaining the investment portfolio I had started with Frank's insurance money, and gradually eliminating the few small debts I had accumulated over the years. The 2008 financial crisis had been challenging for everyone, but my conservative investment approach and stable government employment protected me from the worst effects of the market downturn. While many people lost substantial portions of their retirement savings, my diversified portfolio of bonds, CDs, and conservative mutual funds maintained their value and continued generating modest but steady returns. During my final decade of employment, I focused intensively on retirement planning and financial preparation for my later years. I consulted with financial advisors, researched healthcare options for retirees, and developed budgets that would allow me to maintain my modest lifestyle on a fixed income without becoming financially dependent on Richard. "I want to be a blessing to my son, not a burden," I told my financial advisor when discussing retirement income strategies. "My goal is to maintain my independence and financial security while being able to help Richard's family when opportunities arise." When I retired in 2018, my financial situation was modest but secure. The house Frank and I had purchased in 1985 was fully paid off and worth approximately $185,000 in the competitive Phoenix real estate market. My retirement accounts, including pension funds and personal investments, totaled $340,000. Not wealthy by any measure, but sufficient to supplement Social Security benefits and provide financial independence. My Social Security benefits of $1,800 monthly, combined with pension distributions of approximately $900 monthly, provided $2,700 in reliable income that covered my basic living expenses, property taxes, utilities, groceries, healthcare premiums, and the modest entertainment and travel expenses that made retirement enjoyable. The house provided additional financial security as both a residence and a potential asset that could be leveraged for healthcare costs or other major expenses that might arise during my later years. Phoenix real estate had appreciated steadily over the decades, and my modest 3-bedroom home in Tempe represented substantial equity that enhanced my overall financial position. My retirement lifestyle was comfortable but not extravagant. I maintained the house and garden that Frank and I had developed over the years, stayed involved with library volunteer programs that kept me connected to my professional community, and developed friendships with other retirees in my neighborhood who shared interests in gardening, book clubs, and community activities. I also pursued hobbies and interests that I had often postponed during my working years. I took photography classes at the community college, joined a hiking group that explored Arizona's beautiful desert and mountain landscapes, and began learning watercolor painting through classes offered at the local senior center. Retirement. "Suits you, Mom," Richard would say during his occasional visits. "You seem happy and busy with your activities." Richard had built a moderately successful career in pharmaceutical sales, starting as a sales representative and gradually advancing to territory manager with a salary of approximately $75,000 annually, plus performance bonuses that brought his total compensation to around $95,000 in good years. He had married Karen, a dental hygienist, in 2006, and they had built a comfortable suburban lifestyle in Scottsdale with their 2 children, Emma, who was 16, and Michael, who was 14. Our relationship during my retirement years was cordial, but not particularly close. Richard would visit every few months, usually for Sunday dinner or holiday celebrations. He called on my birthday, Mother's Day, and major holidays, and he included me in family events like graduations, school performances, and occasional barbecues where I could spend time with my grandchildren. But we had never developed the kind of deep emotional connection I had hoped for as Richard matured and established his own family. Our interactions were pleasant, but somewhat surface level, focused on updates about work, the children's activities, and general discussions about current events rather than meaningful conversations about family relationships, memories of Frank, or plans for our shared future. "Mom's doing fine," Richard would tell Karen when she asked about my well-being. "She's got her house and her retirement income, and she seems to enjoy her quiet life. She doesn't need much attention or help with anything." Richard's assessment wasn't entirely wrong. I was financially stable and generally content with my retirement activities. But what he didn't understand was that I would have appreciated more family involvement and deeper connections with my grandchildren. Not because I needed assistance with daily living, but because I missed the closeness we had shared when he was younger, and I was his primary source of support and guidance. The relationship dynamic had shifted over the years from me actively supporting and guiding Richard to a more distant arrangement, where we maintained pleasant but superficial contact without the deeper family bonds that I had hoped would develop as he became an adult and parent himself. I understood that Richard was busy with his career and family responsibilities, and I didn't want to be demanding or needy in ways that might strain our relationship. But I sometimes felt that he viewed me as a resolved issue, financially stable, emotionally independent, and requiring minimal attention or involvement in his daily life. This dynamic would change dramatically in January 2024, when I received news that would alter everything about my financial situation and, ultimately, reveal Richard's true character when he believed I was vulnerable versus when he discovered I held more power than he had ever imagined. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in January while I was tending to my winter garden, enjoying the mild Phoenix weather and planning which vegetables to plant for spring harvesting. I had been retired for 5 years and had settled into comfortable routines that kept me active and engaged while maintaining the financial discipline that had served me throughout my adult life. The caller was Jonathan Marshall, an estate attorney from San Francisco whom I had never heard of, but whose news would change the trajectory of my retirement and my relationship with Richard forever. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm calling regarding the estate of your late aunt, Evelyn Thompson," Mr. Marshall explained in the careful, professional tone that attorneys use when delivering significant news. "I apologize for the delay in contacting you, but it has taken considerable time to locate all of Evelyn's beneficiaries and complete the comprehensive asset evaluation process. I was confused by this call because I didn't remember having an aunt named Evelyn Thompson, and I certainly had no expectation of inheriting anything from relatives I hadn't maintained contact with over the decades since Frank's death in 1987. I'm sorry, but I think there might be some mistake," I replied, setting down my gardening tools and giving this unexpected conversation my full attention. "I don't recall having an aunt named Evelyn Thompson. Mrs. Thompson, Evelyn was your late husband Frank's aunt, Mr. Marshall clarified patiently. She was Frank's father's younger sister, and according to our family research and documentation, you met her several times during the early years of your marriage, though I understand you may not have maintained regular contact after Frank's tragic death. As Mr. Marshall provided more details about family connections and relationships, I began to remember Aunt Evelyn, Frank's eccentric great-aunt who had attended our wedding in 1981, had sent birthday cards to Richard when he was very young, and had occasionally appeared at family gatherings during the first few years of our marriage. But I hadn't heard from her in over 20 years, and had assumed she had died years ago, since Frank's extended family had never been particularly close and communication had ceased entirely after his death. Evelyn passed away in March 2023, Mr. Marshall continued, and her will includes a substantial bequest to you as Frank's widow and Richard's mother. She was quite specific about wanting to provide for Frank's immediate family, particularly his widow, whom she apparently held in high regard based on her interactions with you during your marriage. What kind of bequest? I asked, expecting perhaps a small memorial gift, family heirloom, or modest financial gift that would have sentimental value, but no significant impact on my financial situation. Mrs. Thompson, Evelyn has left you $8.2 million from her estate, Mr. Marshall announced calmly. This includes liquid investment assets, proceeds from the sale of her San Francisco real estate holdings, and various financial accounts that she accumulated over several decades of successful property investing. The number was so large that I initially thought I had misheard, or that there had been some fundamental mistake in the estate documentation. $8 million was more money than I had ever imagined possessing, more than I could have saved, in several lifetimes of library work, and more than enough to completely transform my modest retirement lifestyle and provide generational wealth for Richard's family. I'm sorry, could you repeat that amount? I asked, sitting down heavily on my garden bench as the magnitude of this news began to register, and my mind struggled to process the implications of such unexpected wealth. $8.2 million, Mrs. Thompson, Mr. Marshall confirmed with the patience of someone accustomed to delivering life-changing financial news. Evelyn accumulated substantial wealth through strategic real estate investments in San Francisco over several decades. She purchased properties in emerging neighborhoods during the 1970s and 1980s, held them through multiple market cycles, and benefited enormously from the Bay Area real estate appreciation that occurred over the past 40 years. Mr. Marshall explained that Aunt Evelyn had been a remarkably savvy investor who had started with a small inheritance from her own parents and had systematically built a real estate portfolio that eventually included 12 rental properties in San Francisco, 2 commercial buildings, and substantial stock market investments that had grown exponentially over time. Evelyn never married or had children, Mr. Marshall continued, and she specified in her will that she wanted her wealth to benefit Frank's family in recognition of the kindness and inclusion you showed her during your marriage. She noted in her personal papers that you were one of the few family members who treated her with genuine warmth and respect, rather than viewing her as an eccentric spinster. I vaguely remembered that Evelyn had been considered the odd member of Frank's family, a woman who had never married, had worked in real estate, and had lived alone in San Francisco while the rest of the family remained in Arizona. During family gatherings, she had often seemed uncomfortable with family dynamics and had gravitated toward conversations with me about books, current events, and topics beyond family gossip and local news. She mentioned in her estate planning documents that you were intelligent, kind, and genuinely interested in her life and perspectives, Mr. Marshall explained. Evelyn felt that you would use her inheritance wisely and that providing for Frank's widow and son would honor his memory in ways that mattered to her. The inheritance processing would require several months to complete, involving probate procedures, tax documentation, asset liquidation, and transfers that required patience, discretion, and professional legal assistance. Mr. Marshall strongly advised me to maintain complete confidentiality about the inheritance until all legal processes were finalized, and the assets were officially under my control. Mrs. Thompson, I cannot emphasize strongly enough the importance of keeping this inheritance completely private until everything is finalized, he explained. Large inheritances can create unexpected complications with family relationships, social dynamics, and financial security. It's crucial to have full legal control of the assets before making any announcements or decisions about distribution or use. This advice seemed prudent and wise, especially since I needed considerable time to process the emotional and practical implications of suddenly possessing such substantial wealth. At 73 years old, I had lived my entire adult life as a careful budgeter who planned purchases, worried about long-term financial security, and made decisions based on modest fixed-income constraints. The concept of having $8.2 million was overwhelming and required careful consideration about how to manage such resources responsibly, how to ensure the wealth would benefit Richard and my grandchildren, and how to handle the social and family dynamics that such a windfall might create. Over the following months, as the inheritance processing continued through the complex legal and financial procedures, I maintained my normal routine and lifestyle while privately researching wealth management strategies, charitable giving options, estate planning considerations, and tax implications that would become relevant once the inheritance was officially transferred to my accounts. I also began to consider how this windfall might affect my relationship with Richard, and whether his response to my sudden wealth would reveal aspects of his character that had remained hidden during the years when he viewed me as financially, modest, and emotionally independent. But I had no idea that keeping the inheritance private would create an unintentional test of Richard's family loyalty that would reveal his true priorities and ultimately cost him access to wealth that could have transformed his family's future for generations to come. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would teach me more about my son's character than 40 years of motherhood had revealed, and the lesson would prove to be worth every penny of the $8.2 million I was about to inherit. Looking back now with the clarity that comes from painful experience, I can see that Richard's character flaws weren't sudden developments that emerged. During my later years, they were consistent patterns that had been evident since childhood, but that I had consistently rationalized, excused, or attributed to normal developmental phases rather than recognizing them as fundamental personality traits that would define his approach to family relationships throughout his adult life. Richard had always been what teachers diplomatically called intelligent but self-focused. From elementary school through high school, he demonstrated academic capability and social charm that made him popular with teachers and peers. But he consistently struggled with empathy, genuine concern for others, and follow-through on responsibilities that didn't provide immediate personal benefits or recognition. During his elementary years at Desert View Elementary in Tempe, Richard excelled in subjects that came easily to him and earned recognition. Math competitions where his quick analytical skills gave him advantages, science fair projects where his creativity and presentation abilities impressed judges, and reading contests where his natural intelligence allowed him to outperform classmates without requiring significant effort or study time. But he would consistently avoid activities that required patience, sustained effort, or collaboration with students who might slow down his progress or limit his individual achievement. Group projects became exercises in either dominating the work completely to ensure he received the grade he wanted, or contributing the bare minimum if he felt his teammates weren't capable of helping him achieve his academic goals. Richard is exceptionally bright and has tremendous potential. His third-grade teacher, Mrs. Patterson, wrote in a parent conference report that I still remember word for word because it captured something troubling about his approach to relationships, even at age 8. However, he seems to have difficulty understanding how his actions affect others and rarely volunteers to help classmates who are struggling with concepts he has already mastered. When I discussed this feedback with Richard, trying to help him understand the importance of kindness and helping others, his response revealed the self-centered thinking that would characterize his approach to relationships throughout his life. "Mom, why should I slow down my learning to help kids who can't keep up?" he asked with genuine puzzlement, as if concern for others was an unreasonable expectation. "If I help them too much, they won't learn to figure things out for themselves, and I might fall behind in my own work." At 8 years old, Richard was already developing sophisticated justifications for selfishness that made his lack of empathy sound like logical problem-solving rather than recognizing that his unwillingness to help others reflected fundamental character issues. "Richard, part of being a good person is caring about others and helping when we can," I explained, hoping to instill values of compassion and community responsibility. "Your father always taught you that we should look out for people who need assistance. But Dad also taught me that I should work hard and do my best in school," Richard replied, using Frank's memory to justify behavior that Frank would have found disappointing. "I think Dad would want me to focus on my own success rather than getting distracted by other people's problems." This pattern of selectively remembering lessons that supported his preferred behavior, while ignoring values that would require him to sacrifice his convenience for others, would become a hallmark of Richard's character throughout his childhood and into his adult years. During 4th grade, the pattern intensified when Richard's teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, specifically requested a parent conference to discuss Richard's approach to group work and peer relationships that had become disruptive to classroom dynamics and concerning from a social development perspective. "Richard is clearly one of the brightest students I've taught in 15 years, Mr. Rodriguez explained during our meeting. But he seems to view his classmates as obstacles to his success rather than as potential collaborators or friends. This is creating social problems that could affect his long-term development." "What specifically are you observing?" I asked, feeling defensive about criticism of Richard's academic focus, but also concerned about reports of social difficulties. Yesterday, during a group science project about solar system exploration, Richard told his 3 teammates that they were too slow and too stupid to contribute meaningfully to the assignment, Mr. Rodriguez explained with obvious concern. He then completed the entire project himself, including parts that were specifically assigned to other students, and presented it as his individual work rather than acknowledging any team collaboration. When I explained that group projects are designed to teach collaboration skills, and that excluding his teammates defeated the educational purpose, Richard's response was that he didn't care about their feelings or learning experiences as long as he received the grade he deserved for his individual effort. This incident should have been a major warning sign that Richard was developing concerning attitudes about relationships and responsibilities to others. But instead of recognizing it as a character issue that required immediate attention and correction, I chose to interpret his behavior as the natural result of being intellectually gifted in an educational system that didn't always provide appropriate challenges or recognition for advanced students. "He's just very driven and wants to do well," I explained to Mr. Rodriguez, unconsciously making excuses for behavior that was clearly problematic. "Richard has always been competitive and focused on achievement. Maybe he just needs to be around other students who can match his academic level." "Mrs. Thompson, the concerning issue isn't Richard's drive or academic ability," Mr. Rodriguez replied gently but firmly. "It's his complete lack of concern for how his actions affect other people and his willingness to hurt others to achieve his personal goals. These are character issues that go beyond academic placement or intellectual challenge. Richard needs to learn that success achieved by excluding, dismissing, or hurting others isn't real success," he continued. "If he doesn't develop empathy and collaborative skills now, he'll struggle with relationships and teamwork throughout his life, regardless of how intelligent or academically successful he becomes." This conversation should have prompted serious reflection about Richard's character development and immediate intervention to address his concerning attitudes about relationships and responsibilities. But I was still dealing with the grief and stress of single parenthood following Frank's death, and I found it easier to focus on Richard's academic achievements rather than confronting difficult behavioral issues that would require sustained attention and correction. He'll learn to work better with others when he's around people who can keep up with him intellectually, I rationalized, convincing myself that Richard's selfishness was a temporary phase that would resolve naturally as he matured and found more appropriate peer groups. The pattern continued and actually intensified during middle school at Tempe Middle School, where Richard's academic abilities earned him placement in advanced courses and gifted programs that provided intellectual challenges, but also created new opportunities for him to demonstrate his unwillingness to support others or prioritize group success over individual recognition. In 6th grade, Richard joined the school's academic decathlon team, which should have been an excellent opportunity for him to learn teamwork while pursuing intellectual challenges. But his approach to team participation revealed the depth of his self-centered thinking and his inability to understand that group success required individual sacrifice and mutual support. Richard is incredibly knowledgeable and performs excellently during individual competition segments, his academic decathlon coach, Ms. Foster, explained during a parent meeting, but he consistently undermines team performance by refusing to help weaker team members improve, and by openly expressing frustration with teammates who don't match his academic level. "What do you mean specifically?" I asked, hoping the issues were minor and could be resolved through better communication or role adjustments within the team structure. During practice sessions, Richard will answer questions quickly and correctly, but when teammates struggle with similar questions, he'll make comments like, "This is obvious," or "How do you not know this?" rather than offering assistance or encouragement, Ms. Foster explained. His behavior makes other students feel stupid and inadequate, which destroys team morale and actually hurts overall performance. More concerning, when I've asked Richard to help tutor struggling teammates, he's refused, saying that their poor performance isn't his responsibility and that he shouldn't have to sacrifice his own preparation time to help people who aren't smart enough to be on the team anyway. This feedback revealed that Richard's selfishness was becoming more pronounced and calculated as he got older, rather than improving through natural maturation or social learning. He was actively choosing to prioritize his individual success over team achievement, and was willing to hurt others emotionally to maintain his sense of superiority. When I discussed this behavior with Richard, his response demonstrated that he had developed increasingly sophisticated justifications for his lack of empathy and unwillingness to support others. "Mom, I joined academic decathlon to challenge myself and compete at a high level," he explained with the kind of logical tone that made his selfishness sound reasonable. "If other kids can't keep up, that's not my fault, and it's not my job to fix their problems." "But Richard, part of being on a team is helping your teammates succeed," I replied, trying to help him understand basic principles of collaboration and mutual support. "Your success and the team's success are connected." "But Mom, if I spend my time teaching other people things they should already know, I won't have time to prepare properly for my own competition areas," he argued. "That could hurt my individual scores and my chances for academic recognition and scholarships." "Besides," he added, revealing the depth of his self-centered thinking, "if these kids can't handle academic decathlon without constant help, maybe they shouldn't be on the team. The team would be stronger with better students who don't need tutoring." Richard was 12 years old and already demonstrating the kind of ruthless self-interest that would characterize his approach to family relationships. Throughout his adult life, he viewed other people as either useful for achieving his goals or as obstacles to be avoided, rather than understanding that relationships required mutual care and support regardless of immediate personal benefit. The most troubling aspect of this pattern was that Richard's selfishness was often rewarded in academic and social contexts that prioritized individual achievement over character development. His high test scores, academic awards, and articulate presentation skills earned praise from teachers and admiration from peers, while his lack of empathy and unwillingness to support others was often overlooked or excused as the natural behavior of a high-achieving student. During 7th and 8th grades, Richard's academic success continued to mask his character flaws and provide justification for his self-centered behavior. He earned straight A's, won regional math competitions, received recognition for his debate skills, and was accepted into advanced placement courses that enhanced his high school preparation and college prospects. But his approach to family responsibilities during this period revealed the concerning patterns that would eventually define his treatment of me during my later years when he believed I was vulnerable and financially dependent on his support and attention. When Frank's cancer diagnosis was discovered in 1986, 1 year before his death, our family faced the first major crisis that would test Richard's willingness to sacrifice his convenience and priorities to support family members during difficult times. Richard was 11 years old enough to understand the seriousness of his father's illness and to contribute to family support efforts in age-appropriate ways. But Richard's response to Frank's cancer revealed his fundamental inability to prioritize family needs over his personal comfort and academic interests. Instead of recognizing that his father was facing a life-threatening illness that required family unity and support, Richard seemed to view Frank's cancer as an inconvenient disruption to his academic pursuits and social activities. "Richard, Dad is really sick, and we all need to help more around the house and be supportive while he goes through treatment," I explained during a family meeting after Frank's first oncology appointment. "That means everyone taking on additional responsibilities and being understanding when Dad doesn't feel well." Richard's immediate response was revealing and troubling. "How long is Dad's treatment going to last? Because I have some important academic competitions coming up this semester that I can't afford to miss or do poorly in." "Richard, your father has cancer," I said, shocked by his focus on academic convenience rather than family crisis. "We don't know exactly how long treatment will take, but family needs to come first during this difficult time. I understand that Dad is sick," he replied, with the careful tone that indicated he was saying what he thought I wanted to hear rather than expressing genuine concern. "But I also can't let his illness hurt my chances for academic scholarships and recognition. That wouldn't be good for anyone in the long run." Frank, who was sitting right there listening to this conversation despite feeling exhausted from his initial cancer treatments, looked hurt but not surprised by Richard's reaction. "Son, I'm not asking you to sacrifice your education or your academic goals," he said quietly. "I'm just hoping you'll be around more and maybe help your mother with some of the extra work that my treatment is going to create." "Of course I'll help when I can," Richard agreed readily. "But I need to make sure that family responsibilities don't interfere with my academic priorities or my preparation for high school placement tests." What became clear over the following months was that Richard's definition of helping when I can meant helping only when it was convenient for his schedule and didn't require him to sacrifice anything he actually wanted to do. His availability for family support was consistently limited by academic commitments, extracurricular activities, social plans, and personal interests that he deemed more important than supporting his dying father. When Frank needed someone to drive him to chemotherapy appointments because the medications made him too tired and nauseous to drive safely, Richard was consistently unavailable due to academic obligations that he presented as non-negotiable and more important than family medical needs. "I have math team practice today," he would say when asked to provide transportation or accompany Frank to medical appointments. "Coach said missing practice could affect my chances for state competition, and that's really important for my college application portfolio." "I have a study group for advanced placement preparation," he would explain when Frank needed help with household tasks that had become difficult during cancer treatment. "These test scores will determine my class placement in high school, and I can't afford to fall behind in my preparation." "I promised Tommy I'd help him with his science fair project," he would offer when I asked him to spend time with Frank, who was feeling isolated and depressed during treatment. "He's depending on me, and I can't let him down." The irony was obvious and painful. Richard was always available to help friends, classmates, and teachers with their academic projects and social plans, but never seemed to have time to help his own father during cancer treatment. He had learned to present himself as helpful and caring to the outside world, while reserving his most selfish behavior for family members who loved him unconditionally. When Frank's condition worsened during Richard's sophomore year of high school, and he needed more intensive medical care and emotional support, Richard's absence became even more pronounced and deliberate. Instead of recognizing that his father was dying and needed family presence during his final months, Richard seemed to increase his involvement in extracurricular activities and social commitments that kept him away from home. "Richard, your father, is really struggling right now," I said during one of many conversations where I tried to help him understand the gravity of Frank's situation. "He needs to know that his family loves him and that we're all committed to supporting him through this difficult time." "I do love Dad," Richard replied with what sounded like genuine puzzlement. "But I don't see how me sitting around the house being sad is going to help him get better. I think Dad would want me to keep focusing on my future, and my success rather, than getting depressed about his illness." "It's not about sitting around being sad," I explained with increasing frustration. "It's about being present and available when he needs emotional support or practical help. It's about showing him that he's more important to you than your extracurricular activities and social plans." "But Mom, these activities are important for my college applications and my future opportunities," Richard protested with the logic that made his selfishness sound like responsible planning. "Dad always told me that education and achievement should be my top priorities. I'm just following the values he taught me." Richard had developed a sophisticated ability to reframe his selfishness as virtue, presenting his unwillingness to sacrifice for family as evidence that he was following family values about education and achievement. He could make his absence during crisis sound like dedication to principles, rather than acknowledging that he simply didn't want to deal with the emotional demands of supporting a dying parent. When Frank died during Richard's junior year of high school, his response was notably detached and practical rather than emotional or supportive. While I was devastated by the loss of my husband and struggling to manage grief while maintaining household stability and supporting Richard through his remaining school years, Richard seemed primarily concerned about how Frank's death might affect his college application timeline and scholarship opportunities. "I know this is a difficult time for everyone," he said during the funeral planning process, "but I need to make sure that Dad's death doesn't negatively impact my college applications. I've been working toward early admission deadlines, and I can't afford to fall behind in my preparation now." "Richard, your father just died," I said, hardly able to believe we were having this conversation during the most painful period of our family's life. "College applications can wait a few weeks while we handle funeral arrangements and adjust to this enormous loss." "But Mom, early admission deadlines are completely non-negotiable," he replied with the kind of logical tone that made his selfishness sound reasonable and responsible. "Dad would want me to stay focused on my academic goals. The best way to honor his memory is to achieve the success he always wanted for me." Frank had indeed wanted Richard to be successful and had consistently emphasized the importance of education throughout his life, but he had also emphasized the importance of family loyalty, character development, moral integrity, and supporting others during difficult times. Richard was selectively remembering only the lessons that justified his own priorities while completely ignoring the values that would have required him to sacrifice his convenience for family needs. During the weeks following Frank's funeral, when I was struggling with overwhelming grief and the practical challenges of managing household finances, insurance claims, legal paperwork, and supporting a teenage son while working full-time, Richard's primary concern was ensuring that his college application essays properly leveraged Frank's death for maximum emotional impact with admissions committees. "I'm writing my main essay about how Dad's cancer taught me about perseverance and overcoming challenges," he announced one evening while I was going through Frank's business papers and trying to understand the full scope of insurance benefits and financial arrangements I had inherited. "What did you learn about perseverance?" I asked, genuinely curious since Richard had seemed to avoid most of the challenges that Frank's cancer had created for our family. Well, watching Dad fight cancer taught me that successful people don't let obstacles prevent them from achieving their goals, Richard explained with the confidence of someone who had never actually faced serious obstacles or made meaningful sacrifices. And seeing how you managed work and household responsibilities while dealing with Dad's illness showed me the importance of staying focused on your duties even when personal problems are trying to distract you. The essay Richard eventually produced was well-written and emotionally manipulative, presenting him as someone who had learned profound lessons about family loyalty, personal strength, and overcoming adversity through his father's death. But the reality was that Richard had learned to observe other people's struggles without participating in them, and to extract useful narratives from family crises without actually providing support during those crises. The essay helped Richard gain admission to Arizona State University with partial scholarship support, and I was proud of his academic achievement, even while recognizing that his success had been built on avoiding rather than embracing the family responsibilities that Frank's illness had created. I funded Richard's college education through the combination of scholarship support, the college fund I had been building since Frank's death, and current income that required careful budgeting, but allowed Richard to graduate with minimal student loan debt. I was committed to providing him with the educational opportunities that Frank and I had always planned, regardless of the character concerns that had emerged during his teenage years. College will help Richard mature and develop better perspectives on relationships and responsibilities, I told myself, when friends and family members commented on his self-centered behavior. Being around diverse people and facing new challenges will help him grow into the kind of caring adult that Frank would be proud of. During Richard's college years at Arizona State University, he maintained minimal contact with me unless he needed something specific: financial support for expenses that weren't covered by his scholarship and college fund, career advice for internship applications, networking connections through my professional relationships, or practical assistance with housing, transportation, or academic planning. Our conversations during this period were pleasant but superficial, focused primarily on his achievements, social activities, and future plans, rather than on building deeper emotional connections or expressing genuine interest in my life, well-being, or adjustment to widowhood and single living. "How are your classes going this semester?" I would ask during our monthly phone calls. "Really well," he would reply with enthusiasm about his academic progress. "I'm maintaining a 3.8 GPA, and I've been selected for a competitive business internship program that could lead to excellent job opportunities after graduation." "That's wonderful. How are you feeling about the anniversary of Dad's death coming up next month?" "Oh, that. I'm doing fine with it," he would respond with obvious discomfort about emotional topics. "I've learned to focus on positive memories and lessons rather than dwelling on sadness. Speaking of which, I wanted to ask if you could put me in touch with your friend who works at the bank. I'm applying for their summer internship program, and a personal recommendation would really help my application." Richard had developed an impressive ability to redirect conversations away from emotional topics and toward practical matters where I could provide tangible benefits for his career development or personal goals. He never directly refused to discuss feelings or family relationships, but he consistently steered our interactions toward areas where he could gain something useful. This pattern continued after Richard's graduation in 2003, when he moved to Scottsdale and began building his career in pharmaceutical sales. His choice to remain in the Phoenix area meant that we lived relatively close to each other, but he established a lifestyle and social routine that maintained emotional distance while creating the appearance of family connection through occasional visits and holiday celebrations. Richard's career development was steady and successful, progressing from entry-level sales representative to territory manager over a period of 8 years, with salary increases that allowed him to support a comfortable middle-class lifestyle after his marriage to Karen in 2006, and the birth of their children Emma and Michael in 2007 and 2009. But throughout this period, Richard's approach to our relationship remained consistently superficial and self-serving. He would visit when it was convenient for his schedule, include me in family celebrations that enhanced his image as a caring son, and maintain contact that met social expectations without requiring genuine emotional investment or sacrifice of his personal priorities. The pattern I had observed during Frank's illness, where Richard was always available to help others but rarely available to help family, continued during my retirement years. Richard would enthusiastically participate in community activities, volunteer for his children's school events, assist neighbors with projects, and maintain professional relationships that enhanced his career prospects, but he rarely initiated contact with me or showed interest in my daily life beyond basic health and safety concerns. Richard is such a helpful neighbor, Karen would mention during our occasional conversations. He's always willing to help people with yard work or home repairs when they need assistance. He's very involved with the kids' activities, she would add. He coaches Emma's softball team and helps with Michael's Boy Scout projects. He's really good with kids and community involvement. I was glad that Richard was building a reputation as a helpful community member and engaged father, but I was also puzzled by his willingness to provide substantial assistance to neighbors, colleagues, and community organizations while maintaining such limited involvement with me, despite our geographic proximity and family relationship. The explanation became clear during conversations where Richard would describe his community involvement as networking and reputation building that enhanced his professional image and created social connections that could benefit his career advancement and family social status. It's important to be known as a helpful, reliable person in your community, he would explain when I asked about his various volunteer commitments. People remember when you help them, and those relationships can create opportunities for business, referrals, and social connections that benefit the whole family. Richard had learned to provide assistance strategically, focusing on relationships that enhanced his social status or could provide future benefits, while minimizing investment in family relationships that he viewed as established and requiring minimal maintenance to preserve. This approach to relationships, calculating the costs and benefits of time investment and focusing energy on connections that provided maximum return, would ultimately define his response to my aging and his assumptions about my financial situation during the period when I was secretly inheriting $8.2 million while appearing to be a modest retiree living on fixed income. The stage was being set for Richard to make the most costly miscalculation of his life, based on assumptions about my vulnerability and financial dependence that would prove to be catastrophically wrong when he needed to choose between his convenience and my well-being during a family crisis that would reveal his true character and cost him access to generational wealth beyond his wildest imagination. In October 2024, 9 months after receiving news of my $8.2 million inheritance, and while still maintaining complete secrecy about my newfound wealth, I experienced the health crisis that would create the vulnerability Richard needed to reveal his true character and make the decisions that would ultimately cost him access to generational wealth beyond his comprehension. The crisis began innocuously, with what I initially dismissed as typical aging concerns: occasional dizziness when standing up quickly, mild fatigue during my usual gardening activities, and episodes of confusion that I attributed to normal forgetfulness rather than recognizing them as potential symptoms of a serious underlying medical condition. At 73 years old, I had been fortunate to maintain relatively good health throughout my retirement years. My annual medical checkups consistently showed normal blood pressure, healthy cholesterol levels, and the kind of overall physical condition that my doctor described as excellent for your age. I took minimal medications, just a daily multivitamin and occasional ibuprofen for minor aches and pains associated with gardening and household maintenance. My active lifestyle included daily walks through my Tempe neighborhood, regular gardening that kept me physically engaged, weekly grocery shopping trips, and participation in community activities that provided both social interaction and moderate physical activity. I felt capable, independent, and optimistic about maintaining my health and autonomy throughout my later years. But during late September 2024, I began experiencing symptoms that were subtle enough to dismiss individually, but concerning when considered, together as potential indicators of developing health problems that required medical attention and evaluation. The dizziness episodes occurred primarily when I changed positions quickly, standing up from gardening, getting out of bed in the morning, or rising from my favorite reading chair in the living room. Initially, I attributed these episodes to normal age-related changes in blood pressure regulation and made simple adjustments to my daily routines, moving more slowly and taking time to adjust between positions. The fatigue was more concerning, because it affected activities that I had always enjoyed and managed easily. My daily garden maintenance, which typically energized me and provided satisfaction, began feeling exhausting after just 30 or 40 minutes of work. Grocery shopping trips that had been pleasant social outings became tiring expeditions that left me needing to rest for the remainder of the day. Most troubling were the episodes of confusion that began occurring during routine activities. I would find myself standing in my kitchen, unable to remember why I had gone there or what task I had intended to complete. While driving familiar routes to the library or grocery store, I would occasionally become momentarily uncertain about directions that I had followed hundreds of times without conscious thought. Everyone experiences these kinds of memory lapses as they get older, I told myself when these incidents occurred. It's probably just the normal aging process and nothing to be concerned about. But by early October, the symptoms had increased in frequency and intensity to the point where I could no longer dismiss them as normal aging or attribute them to temporary stress or fatigue. The dizziness episodes were occurring daily and were severe enough to require sitting down until they passed. The confusion incidents were happening multiple times per week and were affecting my confidence about driving and managing household tasks independently. During the second week of October, I experienced a frightening episode that forced me to acknowledge that I needed medical evaluation and possibly assistance with daily living activities that I had always managed independently. I had driven to the Fry's grocery store on Mill Avenue, a routine weekly trip that I had been making for over 20 years. But after completing my shopping and loading groceries into my car, I found myself sitting in the parking lot, completely unable to remember how to get home to my house that was less than 2 miles away. The confusion wasn't just momentary disorientation or temporary forgetfulness. For nearly 15 minutes, I sat in my car looking at familiar surroundings that suddenly seemed foreign and threatening, unable to access mental maps and navigation knowledge that had been automatic for decades. Eventually, the confusion cleared, enough for me to recognize landmarks and remember the route home. But the experience was terrifying and humiliating in ways that forced me to confront the possibility that I was developing serious cognitive or neurological problems that could affect my independence and safety. That evening, I called my primary care physician, Dr. Patricia Hernandez, and scheduled an appointment for comprehensive evaluation of my symptoms and discussion of potential causes and treatment options. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm glad you called," Dr. Hernandez said when I described my symptoms during our phone conversation. "The combination of dizziness, fatigue, and confusion episodes that you're describing could indicate several different conditions that require medical evaluation. We need to run some tests and get to the bottom of what's causing these symptoms." The medical appointment was scheduled for the following week, but Dr. Hernandez advised me to avoid driving until we understood the cause of my confusion episodes and to consider asking family members or friends to assist with errands and activities that might be affected by dizziness or cognitive symptoms. "Mrs. Thompson, I don't want to alarm you, but confusion episodes while driving can be dangerous for both you and other people," she explained. "Until we determine what's causing these symptoms, it would be safer to limit your driving and ask for help with transportation when you need to go places." This conversation marked the beginning of a period when I would need to acknowledge my developing vulnerability and request assistance from family members, specifically Richard, during a health crisis that would test his willingness to prioritize my well-being over his personal convenience and reveal his true character. when I appeared to be financially dependent and unable to compensate him for his time and attention. The decision to contact Richard about my health concerns was complicated by several factors that made me hesitant to reach out for family support. First, our relationship had been pleasant but distant for years, with limited regular contact beyond holiday celebrations and occasional social visits. I didn't want to seem needy or demanding by suddenly requiring assistance after years of independence. Second, I was aware that Richard and Karen had busy lives with teenage children, career responsibilities, and community commitments that filled their schedules and limited their availability for additional family obligations. I didn't want to burden them with caregiving responsibilities that might create resentment or stress in their household. Most importantly, I was still maintaining complete secrecy about my $8.2 million inheritance, which meant that Richard believed I was living on modest fixed income and had limited financial resources for hiring professional assistance or paying for services that might make caregiving less burdensome for family members. But Dr. Hernandez's advice about avoiding driving and seeking assistance with daily activities made it clear that I needed family support during my medical evaluation and treatment. Regardless of the potential complications or relationship dynamics that might result from acknowledging my vulnerability. On Thursday evening, October 17, 2024, I called Richard and explained my health symptoms, medical appointment schedule, and need for temporary assistance with transportation and possibly other daily activities until my condition could be diagnosed and treated. "Mom, what kind of symptoms are you having?" Richard asked, when I explained that I needed to discuss some health concerns and might need family assistance for a while. "I've been experiencing dizziness, fatigue, and some confusion episodes that my doctor wants to evaluate," I explained, trying to sound calm and matter-of-fact rather than alarmed or dramatic. "She's advised me to avoid driving until we understand what's causing these symptoms, so I was hoping you might be able to help with transportation to medical appointments, and maybe some errands until we get this figured out." Confusion episodes? Richard's tone immediately shifted to what sounded like concern, but which I would later realize was actually calculation about the potential time commitment and inconvenience that my health problems might create for his schedule. "What kind of confusion? Are we talking about serious memory problems?" "Sometimes I forget where I'm going or why I went somewhere," I admitted, feeling embarrassed about acknowledging cognitive symptoms that made me sound incompetent and potentially incapable of independent living. "Yesterday I got confused about how to get home from the grocery store, even though it's a route I've driven for 20 years. "That's pretty concerning, Mom," Richard replied, and I could hear him discussing the situation with Karen in the background before returning to our conversation. "When is your doctor's appointment?" "Next Tuesday at 2 p.m. with Dr. Hernandez for initial evaluation, and she mentioned that I might need additional tests depending on what she finds," I explained. "I was hoping you could drive me to the appointment since she advised against driving myself." "Tuesday at 2 p.m., Richard repeated, and I could hear him checking his calendar. "That's not great timing because I have a client presentation that afternoon, but I guess I can rearrange some things. How long do you think the appointment will take?" Richard's immediate focus on scheduling inconvenience rather than concern about my health symptoms was the first indication of how he would approach my medical crisis, viewing my needs as disruptions to his routine rather than understanding that family medical emergencies require prioritizing care over convenience. "I'm not sure how long the appointment will take," I replied. "Dr. Hernandez mentioned that she might want to run some tests, so it could be a few hours depending on what she wants to check." "A few hours?" Richard's tone revealed obvious frustration about the potential time commitment. "Mom, I can't spend the entire afternoon at medical appointments. I have work responsibilities that I can't just cancel or postpone." "I understand that you're busy," I said, feeling guilty about creating inconvenience for Richard while also feeling disappointed by his reaction to my health crisis. "Maybe I could take a taxi or ride-sharing service for the appointment." "Mom, you just said you're having confusion episodes. Richard replied with logic that made his reluctance to help sound like reasonable concern. I don't think you should be taking taxis or ride shares when you're having cognitive problems. That could be dangerous. What about Karen? I asked. Would she be available to help with transportation? Karen has her own work schedule and responsibilities with the kids, Richard explained. Emma has softball practice and Michael has scout meetings that require transportation. We can't just drop everything because you're having some medical issues. The phrase, some medical issues, minimized symptoms that I had described as serious. Enough to require medical evaluation, and that had affected my ability to drive safely. Richard was already framing my health crisis as minor inconvenience, rather than understanding that I was experiencing potentially serious medical problems that required family support. Richard, I'm not asking you to drop everything, I said, trying to maintain a calm tone while feeling hurt by his response. I'm asking for help getting to one medical appointment because my doctor advised against driving. This isn't a casual request. Okay, Richard agreed reluctantly. I'll figure out a way to take you to the Tuesday appointment. But Mom, if this turns into ongoing medical issues that require regular transportation and assistance, we're going to need to discuss other arrangements. Karen and I can't become full-time caregivers. The conversation ended with Richard agreeing to provide transportation to my medical appointment, but his reluctance and immediate discussion of other arrangements revealed his assumption that my health problems were likely to require sustained care that he wasn't willing to provide, even temporarily during diagnosis and treatment. More troubling was his reference to full-time caregivers in response to a request for help with a single medical appointment, suggesting that he was already viewing my health symptoms as indicators of long-term dependency rather than as temporary medical issues that might be easily treated once properly diagnosed. The following week, while waiting for my medical appointment, I experienced additional symptoms that made me increasingly concerned about my condition and more dependent on others for assistance with daily activities that I had always managed independently. The dizziness episodes increased in frequency and intensity, occurring not just when changing positions, but also during routine activities like cooking, cleaning, and personal care. I found myself needing to sit down frequently throughout the day and requiring longer rest periods between tasks that had previously been effortless. The confusion episodes became more frequent and lasted longer, affecting my ability to manage medication schedules, follow cooking instructions, and complete household tasks that required sequential steps and sustained attention. I began writing detailed notes about daily activities and keeping lists of tasks to compensate for memory lapses that were becoming unreliable and concerning. Most frightening were episodes of spatial disorientation that occurred even within my own home. I would sometimes find myself standing in hallways or rooms, momentarily unable to remember where I was trying to go or what I had intended to do, even in the house where I had lived for over 30 years. These symptoms forced me to acknowledge that I was becoming genuinely vulnerable and potentially unable to live independently without assistance, at least until my medical condition could be diagnosed and treated. But they also created the exact vulnerability that would allow Richard to reveal his true priorities when faced with caregiving responsibilities that offered no personal benefit or compensation. On Tuesday, October 22nd, Richard arrived at my house to provide transportation to my medical appointment, but his behavior during the drive revealed his attitude toward my health crisis and his reluctance to provide ongoing support if my condition required sustained care. Mom, I want you to know that I rearranged 3 client meetings to be here today, he announced as we drove to Dr. Hernandez's office. This appointment is costing me potential commissions and could affect my monthly sales targets. I appreciate you taking time from work, I replied, feeling guilty about the inconvenience while also feeling hurt that he was quantifying the cost of helping his mother during a medical crisis. I just want to make sure you understand that this kind of schedule disruption can't become a regular thing, Richard continued. Karen and I have our own responsibilities and commitments that we can't ignore every time you have a medical appointment. Richard, I don't even know what's wrong with me yet, I said, feeling frustrated by his assumption that I would require ongoing assistance. This might be something that can be easily treated with medication or simple lifestyle changes. But Mom, you have to be realistic about aging and health problems, he replied with the tone of someone explaining obvious facts to someone who wasn't thinking clearly. People your age often develop conditions that require ongoing medical management and family assistance. You need to start thinking about long-term care options rather than assuming that temporary help will solve these problems. Richard was already discussing long-term care options before my medical condition had even been diagnosed, suggesting that he was hoping my health problems would be serious enough to justify transferring caregiving responsibilities to professional facilities rather than expecting family members to provide support during treatment and recovery. The medical appointment with Dr. Hernandez included comprehensive examination, blood tests, cognitive assessments, and discussion of symptoms that led to a preliminary diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment with possible early-stage dementia, complicated by medication interactions and vitamin deficiencies that were contributing to my confusion and dizziness episodes. Mrs. Thompson, the good news is that many of your symptoms appear to be related to treatable conditions, Dr. Hernandez explained after reviewing test results and examination findings. Your blood work shows vitamin B12 and vitamin D deficiencies that can cause confusion and fatigue. We also identified some medication interactions that could be contributing to your dizziness. The cognitive assessment shows some areas of concern that we'll want to monitor, but many of your symptoms should improve significantly once we address the nutritional deficiencies and adjust your medications, she continued. With proper treatment, you may regain much of your cognitive function and physical energy. This was encouraging news that suggested my health problems might be largely treatable, rather than requiring the long-term care arrangements that Richard had already begun discussing. But Dr. Hernandez also explained that treatment would require several weeks to become effective, and that I would need ongoing assistance during recovery. Mrs. Thompson, the vitamin supplements and medication adjustments will take 4 to 6 weeks to reach full effectiveness, she explained. During that time, you should continue to avoid driving and should have assistance with activities that require sustained attention or physical coordination. What kind of assistance? Richard asked, and I could tell from his tone that he was concerned about the time commitment and caregiving responsibilities that might be required. Help with grocery shopping, transportation to follow-up appointments, medication management to ensure proper dosing, and possibly assistance with cooking, and household tasks if the confusion episodes continue, Dr. Hernandez replied. Nothing that requires professional nursing care, but Mrs. Thompson shouldn't be completely alone during this recovery period. For how long? Richard pressed, clearly hoping for a specific end date for caregiving responsibilities. We'll reassess in 6 weeks, but I expect significant improvement within a month if Mrs. Thompson responds well to treatment, Dr. Hernandez said. Many patients with similar symptoms show remarkable recovery once the underlying nutritional and medication issues are addressed. The drive home from the medical appointment revealed Richard's true feelings about providing temporary family support during my recovery period. Instead of feeling relieved that my condition appeared to be treatable, he seemed frustrated by the 6-week timeline and concerned about the caregiving expectations that Dr. Hernandez had outlined. Mom, 6 weeks of regular assistance is a lot to ask, he said as we drove back to my house. Karen and I both work full-time, and the kids have activities and commitments that require our attention. We can't reorganize our entire lives around your medical recovery. Richard, I'm not asking you to reorganize your entire life, I replied, hurt by his characterization of temporary medical assistance as unreasonable family demand. I'm asking for help during treatment for medical problems that should improve significantly over the next month. But Mom, even temporary caregiving is a big responsibility, he continued. What if your condition doesn't improve as quickly as the doctor expects? What if you develop additional health problems that require more intensive care? We need to think about backup plans and long-term solutions. What kind of long-term solutions? I asked. Though I was beginning to understand that Richard was looking for ways to transfer caregiving responsibilities to someone else, rather than providing family support during my recovery. Well, there are assisted living facilities that specialize in memory care and cognitive support, Richard explained, revealing that he had already been researching alternatives to family caregiving. They have trained staff who can provide the kind of monitoring and assistance that you might need. Richard, Dr. Hernandez said my symptoms should improve significantly with treatment, I said, shocked that he was already discussing institutional care for conditions that appeared to be largely treatable. She didn't suggest that I needed memory, care, or assisted living. But Mom, you have to be realistic about your limitations and our capabilities as a family, he replied with logic that made abandoning me sound like responsible planning. Professional care facilities have resources and expertise that family members can't provide. It might actually be safer and better for your recovery to have professional supervision rather than relying on family members who don't have medical training. This conversation revealed that Richard was already looking for justifications to transfer my care to institutional settings rather than providing temporary family support during a treatable medical condition. He was framing professional care as superior to family care, rather than understanding that institutional placement should be reserved for situations where family support was genuinely inadequate or medically inappropriate. Over the following weeks, as I began treatment with vitamin supplements and medication adjustments, Richard's approach to my care revealed the calculating, self-serving character that had been evident since childhood, but was now being applied to my medical vulnerability, in ways that would ultimately determine his access to my secret inheritance. Richard provided minimal assistance during my recovery period, offering help only when it was convenient for his schedule, and consistently looking for opportunities to demonstrate that family caregiving was inadequate, and that professional care would be more appropriate for my needs. When I asked for help with grocery shopping, Richard would complain about the time required and suggest that grocery delivery services would be more efficient. When I needed transportation to follow up medical appointments, he would express frustration about work conflicts and recommend medical transport services that could provide more reliable scheduling. Most concerning, Richard began making comments about my cognitive abilities and living situation that seemed designed to undermine my confidence and create justification for institutional care, rather than supporting my recovery and independence. Mom, you seem really confused about your medications, he would say when I asked questions about dosing schedules that Dr. Hernandez had recommended. Maybe it would be safer to have professional supervision to make sure you're taking everything correctly. This house is really too big for someone with your health problems, he would comment when visiting for brief assistance with household tasks. All these stairs and the yard maintenance are probably too much for you to handle safely. You seemed pretty disoriented when I picked you up for your appointment, he would mention to Karen and other family members, creating a narrative that my cognitive symptoms were more severe than they actually were, and building support for institutional care recommendations. These comments revealed that Richard was actively working to create justification for transferring my care to professional facilities rather than supporting my recovery and return to independence. He was exaggerating my symptoms, undermining my confidence, and building family consensus that I was incapable of independent living, despite medical advice that my condition was largely treatable. Most troubling, Richard began researching assisted living facilities and memory care options without my knowledge or consent, presenting this research as responsible family planning, rather than acknowledging that he was looking for ways to abandon caregiving responsibilities that he found inconvenient and burdensome. The stage was being set for Richard to make the decision that would reveal his true character and cost him access to $8.2 million in inheritance, a decision based on his assumption that I was a financially dependent burden, rather than understanding that I was secretly controlling wealth beyond his imagination and carefully observing his response to my apparent vulnerability. Richard's behavior during my health crisis was providing me with invaluable information about his priorities, character, and willingness to support family members during genuine need. But he had no idea that his caregiving decisions were actually determining his financial future, and that the mother he was planning to abandon in institutional care was secretly positioned to either reward or punish his choices in ways that would affect his family for generations to come. What happened over the following 3 weeks would reveal the full extent of Richard's selfishness and his willingness to abandon family members when caregiving required sustained effort without personal benefit. But more importantly, his decisions during this period would demonstrate exactly how he viewed elderly family members who appeared financially dependent and unable to compensate him for his time and attention. By mid-November 2024, my vitamin, supplements, and medication adjustments were beginning to show positive effects. The confusion episodes were decreasing in frequency and intensity. My energy levels were improving noticeably, and Dr. Hernandez was optimistic about my continued recovery and eventual return to independent living. "Mrs. Thompson, your progress has been excellent," she told me during a follow-up appointment that Richard reluctantly attended after complaining about missing work. "Your vitamin levels are normalizing, the medication interactions have been resolved, and your cognitive function tests show significant improvement." "What does that mean for her independence and living situation?" Richard asked immediately, clearly hoping that Dr. Hernandez would recommend continued supervision or institutional care despite my improving condition. "With continued improvement at this rate, Mrs. Thompson should be able to resume most of her normal activities within the next 2 to 3 weeks," Dr. Hernandez replied. "She'll still need to avoid driving for another month while we monitor her progress, but she should be able to manage her household, medications, and daily activities independently." This was encouraging news that should have relieved any family concerns about long-term caregiving responsibilities. My medical condition was responding well to treatment, my cognitive function was recovering, and I would soon be able to return to the independent lifestyle I had maintained throughout my retirement years. But Richard's response to this positive medical news revealed that he had been hoping my health problems would be serious enough to justify transferring me to institutional care, rather than being pleased that his mother was recovering and would regain her independence. "Are you sure she's ready for complete independence?" Richard pressed Dr. Hernandez. "She's been pretty confused and disoriented over the past few weeks. What if her symptoms return or get worse?" "Mr. Thompson, your mother's symptoms were primarily caused by treatable medical conditions that have been addressed," Dr. Hernandez replied with slight concern about Richard's persistence in questioning my recovery. "While we'll continue monitoring her progress, there's no medical reason to expect deterioration or to recommend institutional care at this time." "But what about safety considerations?" Richard continued. "She's living alone in a large house, with stairs and yard maintenance. Even if her cognitive symptoms improve, isn't she at risk for falls or other accidents that could be serious at her age?" Dr. Hernandez looked puzzled by Richard's continued focus on worst-case scenarios rather than celebrating my improving health. "Mr. Thompson, your mother is 73 years old with excellent physical health apart from the temporary symptoms we've been treating. Many people her age live independently for years or even decades. Unless she experiences specific safety incidents, or her condition changes significantly, there's no medical justification for restricting her independence." The drive home from this appointment revealed Richard's true feelings about my recovery, and his frustration that my improving health meant he couldn't justify abandoning caregiving responsibilities by transferring me to professional care. "Mom, I think the doctor is being overly optimistic about your recovery," he said as we drove back to my house. "You've been pretty confused and disoriented, and I don't think a few weeks of improvement means you're ready to live completely alone." "Richard, my symptoms have improved dramatically, and Dr. Hernandez said my recovery has been excellent," I replied, confused by his reluctance to accept positive medical news. "Why are you questioning her professional assessment?" "Because I'm the one who's been dealing with your confusion episodes and safety concerns," he replied with frustration. "The doctor only sees you for brief appointments, but I've witnessed how disoriented and helpless you've been. I think you need more supervision than you're willing to admit." Helpless was not an accurate description of my condition during recovery. While I had needed assistance with transportation and some household tasks, I had continued managing my personal care, medications, finances, and most daily activities independently. Richard was exaggerating my symptoms to justify continued intervention in my living situation. "What kind of supervision do you think I need?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand that Richard was building a case for institutional placement rather than supporting my return to independence. "I think you should consider assisted living or memory care facilities that can provide professional supervision and safety monitoring," he replied, revealing that he had continued researching institutional options despite my improving condition. "It would be safer for you and would relieve family members of constant worry about your well-being." "Richard, I don't need memory care," I said, shocked that he was still pursuing institutional placement after receiving positive medical reports. "Dr. Hernandez said my cognitive function is recovering well and that I should be able to resume normal activities soon." "But Mom, you have to think about the future and worst-case scenarios," he continued with logic that made abandoning me sound like responsible planning. "What if your symptoms return? What if you develop other health problems? What if you have a fall or medical emergency when no one is around to help?" "Those are possibilities that every elderly person faces," I replied. "That doesn't mean everyone over 70 should live in institutional care instead of maintaining their independence as long as medically appropriate." "But Mom, assisted living facilities have trained staff, emergency response systems, and social science activities that would be good for you," Richard explained, presenting institutional care as superior to independent living rather than acknowledging that he simply wanted to transfer caregiving responsibilities to someone else. "They also have costs that I'm not sure my retirement income can handle," I said, testing whether Richard would offer financial assistance to support institutional care that he was recommending for my supposed benefit. "Well, we'd have to look at your finances and see what options are available," Richard replied vaguely, without offering to help with costs or suggesting that money shouldn't be a barrier to care he considered necessary for my safety and well-being. This conversation revealed that Richard was recommending expensive institutional care without offering to help fund it, despite believing that I had limited financial resources, and despite his conviction that professional supervision was essential for my safety. He was essentially suggesting that I should spend my modest retirement savings on institutional care that he considered necessary but wasn't willing to help finance. Over the following week, Richard escalated his campaign to convince me that institutional care was necessary despite my continued improvement and Dr. Hernandez's recommendation that I could resume independent living. His approach revealed sophisticated manipulation tactics designed to undermine my confidence and create artificial crises that would justify his institutional care recommendations. "Mom, I drove by your house yesterday and noticed that your newspapers were still on the driveway at 2 p.m., he would say, creating false evidence of my inability to manage daily routines. "That seems like a sign that you're not keeping up with normal activities." The reality was that I'd been reading my newspaper online rather than retrieving the physical copy from the driveway, a preference that had nothing to do with cognitive ability, but that Richard presented as evidence of declining function. "I've been worried about your medication management," he would comment during visits where he observed my pill organizer and vitamin supplements. "It seems like a lot of medications to keep track of, and mistakes could be dangerous at your age." Had been managing my medications successfully with a weekly pill organizer and calendar system that Dr. Hernandez had reviewed and approved. But Richard was presenting my systematic approach to medication management as evidence that the task was too complex for me to handle safely. "The yard work seems to be getting ahead of you," he would observe when visiting my house during the winter months when outdoor maintenance naturally decreased. "I'm concerned that you're not keeping up with property maintenance that could affect your safety." These comments were designed to create a narrative that I was failing to maintain my household and personal care, despite the fact that my recovery was progressing well and I was successfully managing most aspects of independent living. Most manipulatively, Richard began suggesting that I was becoming socially isolated and that institutional care would provide social opportunities and community that would benefit my emotional well-being. "Mom, you don't seem to have much social interaction or community involvement anymore," he would say, ignoring my continued participation in library volunteer programs, neighborhood book club, and community activities that had resumed as my health improved. "Assisted living facilities have organized activities, social programs, and community dining that would be good for you," he would continue. "You'd have more social interaction and less loneliness than you probably experience living alone." Richard was presenting my independent lifestyle as social isolation, rather than recognizing that I had maintained active community involvement and social connections throughout my retirement years. The breaking point came during the first week of December 2024, when Richard announced that he had scheduled tours of 3 assisted living facilities without consulting me or obtaining my consent to visit institutional care options that I had consistently said I didn't want or need. "Mom, I've set up appointments for us to visit some really nice assisted living communities this week," he announced during a phone call on Monday morning. "I think you'll be impressed by the amenities and services they offer." "Richard, I didn't agree to tour assisted living facilities," I replied, shocked that he had made appointments without my knowledge or consent. "I told you that I want to continue living independently now that my health is improving. But Mom, you need to be open-minded about your options and what would be best for your safety and well-being," he persisted. "These facilities specialize in memory care and cognitive support, and they have excellent reputations." "I don't need memory care," I said firmly. "Dr. Hernandez has confirmed that my cognitive function is recovering well and that I can resume independent living." "Mom, I think you're being unrealistic about your limitations and risks," Richard replied with condescension that suggested he didn't believe I was capable of making rational decisions about my own care. "As your family, we have a responsibility to make sure you're in the safest possible environment." "Who is we?" I asked. "Have you been discussing institutional care options with Karen and other family members without including me in these conversations?" "Karen and I have been talking about what would be best for you," Richard admitted. "We're both concerned about your living situation and think you should at least look at alternatives before dismissing them." This revelation that Richard and Karen had been planning my institutional placement without my participation was deeply hurtful and revealed the extent to which they viewed me as incompetent and unable to participate in decisions about my own life and living arrangements. "Richard, I'm your mother, not a burden to be managed," I said, feeling angry and disappointed by their approach to my recovery and living situation. "I should be included in any discussions about my care, and my preferences should be respected unless there are compelling medical reasons to override them." "Mom, we're not trying to manage you," Richard replied defensively. "We're trying to help you make good decisions about your future. Sometimes family members can see risks and limitations that you might not recognize yourself." "What risks and limitations?" I asked. "Dr. Hernandez said my recovery has been excellent and that I can resume normal activities. What medical or safety concerns justify institutional care that my own doctor hasn't identified?" "It's not just about current medical conditions," Richard explained. "It's about being proactive and preparing for future challenges that could arise as you continue aging. Assisted living provides safeguards and support systems that could prevent problems before they become serious." Richard was advocating for institutional care based on hypothetical future problems rather than current medical needs, while dismissing my doctor's assessment that I was recovering well and could maintain independent living safely. The assisted living facility tours that Richard had scheduled without my consent became the catalyst for the confrontation that would ultimately reveal his true character and lead to the inheritance decision that would change both of our lives forever. On Wednesday, December 4th, 2024, Richard arrived at my house to transport me to the first facility tour, despite my continued objections to visiting institutional care options that I didn't want and didn't need, according to my medical provider. "Mom, I'm not asking you to make any decisions today," he said when I reiterated my reluctance to tour assisted living facilities. "I'm just asking you to look at what's available and keep an open mind about options that might benefit you." "Richard, I've been clear that I want to continue living independently," I replied. "Visiting facilities will just waste everyone's time because I'm not interested in institutional care." "But Mom, you haven't seen what modern assisted living is like," he persisted. "These aren't the nursing homes you might remember from decades ago. They're more like resort communities with luxury amenities and high-quality care." The first facility, Sunset Manor, was located in a lower-income area of Phoenix and was clearly chosen for its affordability rather than its quality or amenities. Despite Richard's description of luxury amenities, the facility was obviously understaffed, poorly maintained, and designed to provide minimal care at the lowest possible cost. The lobby smelled of disinfectant and urine, the furniture was worn and uncomfortable, and the staff members we encountered seemed overwhelmed and stressed rather than providing the professional, caring service that Richard had promised I would find in institutional care. "This is our memory care wing," the facility director explained as we toured corridors lined with residents who appeared heavily medicated, unstimulated, and largely ignored by staff members who were too busy with basic care tasks to provide social interaction or meaningful activities. "What kind of activities and social programs do you offer?" I asked, hoping to understand what Richard thought would be superior to my current lifestyle of community involvement, volunteer work, and social connections with friends and neighbors. "We have bingo twice a week and movie nights on Fridays," the director replied, describing a social calendar that was far less engaging than my current activities of book clubs, library volunteering, community gardening, and cultural events. "What about cognitive stimulation and therapeutic programs for residents who are recovering from temporary medical conditions?" I asked, testing whether the facility could provide the kind of supportive care that would actually benefit someone in my situation. "Our approach focuses on safety and comfort rather than rehabilitation," the director explained, revealing that the facility was designed for long-term custodial care rather than supporting recovery and return to independence. This facility was clearly inappropriate for someone in my condition and situation, but Richard seemed pleased with the tour and encouraged me to consider it as a viable option for my care. "Mom, this seems like a really safe and comfortable environment," he said as we left the facility. "The staff seems caring, and the safety features would provide peace of mind for the whole family." "Richard, this facility is designed for people with advanced dementia and serious cognitive impairment," I replied, shocked that he thought institutional care for severely impaired residents was appropriate for my situation. "I don't need that level of supervision or restriction. But Mom, it's better to be in a safe environment with more care than you need, rather than taking risks with independence that could lead to serious problems," he argued, revealing his willingness to recommend unnecessary institutional care to eliminate any family caregiving responsibilities. The second facility, Desert Springs Assisted Living, was slightly better maintained, but still focused on providing minimal care at low cost, rather than supporting resident independence or offering the amenities that Richard had promised I would find in modern assisted living communities. The rooms were small and institutional, the dining options were limited and unappetizing, and the activity calendar consisted primarily of passive entertainment rather than the engaging, meaningful activities that I enjoyed. In my independent lifestyle, what are the monthly costs for residents here? I asked, testing whether Richard had researched the financial implications of institutional care for someone he believed had limited retirement income. The basic package is $3,200 monthly, with additional charges for medication management, assistance, with personal care and transportation to medical appointments, the facility administrator explained. Most residents pay between $3,800 and $4,500 monthly, depending on their care needs. This cost would consume most of my apparent retirement income and would quickly exhaust my savings if continued long-term. But Richard showed no concern about the financial burden or offered any suggestions for how I would fund institutional care that he considered necessary for my safety. "Those costs are pretty standard for quality assisted living," Richard commented, as if 4,000 plus monthly expenses were reasonable for someone he believed was living on modest fixed income. "Richard, that's more than my total monthly expenses for housing, food, healthcare, and everything else combined," I said, testing his response to financial concerns about care he was recommending. "Mom, you have to think of it as an investment in your safety and well-being," he replied, without offering to help with costs or acknowledging that such expenses would be financially devastating for someone in my apparent financial situation. "Besides," he added, revealing his true motivations, "you could sell your house to help fund assisted living costs. That equity isn't doing you any good just sitting there." Richard was suggesting that I should liquidate my primary asset to fund institutional care that would benefit him by eliminating his caregiving responsibilities, rather than understanding that my house represented both my preferred living situation and my financial security. The third facility, Phoenix Senior Community, was the most expensive and highest quality of the three options, but it was also clearly beyond what Richard believed I could afford, based on his understanding of my financial situation. "This facility looks nice, but the costs are probably prohibitive," Richard said before we even toured the facility. "They're asking $5,500 monthly for basic services, which is probably more than we should consider." His willingness to dismiss higher quality care based on cost, while showing no concern about the financial burden of cheaper facilities, revealed that Richard was primarily focused on finding the most affordable way to transfer caregiving responsibilities, rather than ensuring that I received appropriate care in an environment that would enhance my well-being. The turning point came that evening when Richard and Karen visited my house to discuss the facility tours and pressure me to make a decision about institutional placement that I had never agreed was necessary or appropriate for my situation. "Mom, we think Sunset Manor would be the best option for your needs and budget," Karen announced, despite having minimal involvement in my care or understanding of my medical condition and recovery progress. "It provides the safety and supervision you need while being financially manageable on your retirement income," Richard added, revealing that they had already decided on the cheapest facility regardless of its quality or appropriateness for my actual care needs. "I don't want to live in institutional care," I said firmly. "Dr. Hernandez has confirmed that I'm recovering well and can live independently safely. I want to remain in my own home." "Mom, we're concerned that you're not thinking clearly about your limitations and risks," Karen replied with condescension that suggested she didn't believe I was competent to make decisions about my own life. "What specific limitations and risks?" I asked. "What safety concerns or care needs justify institutional placement that my doctor hasn't identified or recommended?" "You've been confused and disoriented," Richard said, exaggerating symptoms that had largely resolved with treatment. "You've needed help with basic activities and transportation. You're living alone in a house that's too big and potentially dangerous for someone with cognitive problems." "My cognitive symptoms have improved dramatically with treatment," I replied. "Dr. Hernandez expects continued improvement and return to normal function within the next few weeks." "But Mom, what if your symptoms return?" Karen asked. "What if you develop other health problems? What if you have an emergency when no one is around to help?" "Those are risks that all elderly people face," I said. "That doesn't mean everyone over 70 should abandon independent living for institutional care." "Mom, we've made arrangements for you to move to Sunset Manor next week," Richard announced, revealing that they had proceeded with institutional placement without my consent or agreement. "You've made arrangements without my permission?" I asked, shocked that they had committed me to institutional care despite my clear objections and contrary to medical advice supporting independent living. "We've put down a deposit and completed the admission paperwork," Karen explained. The facility is expecting you to move in on Monday, December 9th. I didn't agree to move to institutional care, I said, feeling betrayed and manipulated by family members who were supposed to support my well-being and respect my autonomy. Mom, sometimes family members need to make difficult decisions when elderly relatives aren't thinking clearly about their safety and limitations, Richard replied, revealing that he believed he had the right to override my decisions about my own life and living arrangements. I am thinking clearly, I said firmly. I've been evaluated by my doctor, who confirmed that my cognitive function is recovering and that I can live independently safely. You're ignoring medical advice and my clearly expressed preferences to pursue institutional care that serves your convenience rather than my well-being. That's not true, Richard protested. We're trying to do what's best for you, even if it's not what you want to hear. If you were trying to do what's best for me, you would respect my autonomy, follow medical advice, and support my recovery rather than abandoning me in institutional care against my will, I replied, realizing that this conversation was revealing the fundamental character flaws that would determine Richard's future relationship with his mother and his access to her inheritance. The confrontation escalated when I discovered that Richard and Karen had not only committed me to Sunset Manor without my consent, but had also misrepresented my condition and situation to facility administrators to ensure my acceptance into institutional care. What did you tell them about my medical condition and care needs? I asked, suspecting that they had exaggerated my symptoms to justify admission to memory care services. We told them the truth about your confusion episodes, disorientation, and need for supervision, Richard replied defensively. Did you tell them that my doctor expects full recovery and has cleared me for independent living? I pressed. We told them about your diagnosis and current symptoms, Karen said evasively, avoiding my specific question about recovery prognosis and medical recommendations. Did you tell them that my cognitive symptoms are improving with treatment and that I don't actually need memory care services? I continued. Mom, we focused on your current situation and safety needs rather than speculating about future improvement, Richard explained, revealing that they had deliberately withheld information about my positive prognosis to ensure facility acceptance. This misrepresentation of my condition and medical status was not only unethical, but potentially fraudulent, designed to secure institutional placement that served their interests rather than my medical needs or personal preferences. Richard, you've lied to institutional care providers about my condition to justify placement that my doctor hasn't recommended and that I don't want, I said, finally understanding the full extent of their betrayal. We haven't lied, he protested. We've provided accurate information about your symptoms and care needs. Omitting my positive prognosis and recovery expectations is lying by omission, I replied. You've misrepresented my situation to justify institutional care that benefits you more than it benefits me. The final betrayal came when Richard and Karen announced that they had scheduled movers to pack my belongings and transport me to Sunset Manor on Monday morning, regardless of my objections or refusal to consent to institutional placement. Mom, the arrangements have been made and can't. Omitting my positive prognosis and recovery expectations is lying by omission, I replied. You've misrepresented my situation to justify institutional care that benefits you more than it benefits me. The final betrayal came when Richard and Karen announced that they had scheduled movers to pack my belongings and transport me to Sunset Manor on Monday morning, regardless of my objections or refusal to consent to institutional placement. Mom, the arrangements have been made and can't be canceled without financial penalties, Richard said, using artificial deadlines and financial pressure to coerce my compliance with their plans. We'll help you pack over the weekend so the transition goes smoothly, Karen added, as if my forced relocation to institutional care was a collaborative family project rather than an abandonment against my will. I'm not moving to institutional care, I said firmly. Cancel the arrangements and forfeit whatever deposits you've paid. I'm remaining in my own home. Mom, you don't really have a choice at this point, Richard replied, revealing the extent to which he believed he could control my life and decisions. The arrangements are final, and it's what's best for your safety and our family's peace of mind. Whose peace of mind? I asked. Your peace of mind about avoiding caregiving responsibilities, or my peace of mind about maintaining my independence and autonomy? Our peace of mind about knowing you're safe and properly supervised, Richard said, without acknowledging that his definition of proper supervision meant institutional control rather than supporting my recovery and independence. That evening, alone in my house while contemplating the forced institutional placement that Richard and Karen had arranged against my will and contrary to medical advice, I made the decision that would change both of our lives forever and teach Richard the most expensive lesson about assuming elderly family members are financially helpless and unable to defend themselves against exploitation and abandonment. Called my estate attorney, Jonathan Marshall, and explained the situation that had developed with Richard's attempts to force institutional placement despite my objections and my doctor's support for continued independent living. Mr. Marshall, I need to make immediate and comprehensive changes to my estate planning and inheritance arrangements, I explained from my house while Richard and Karen believed they had successfully manipulated me into accepting institutional care. Mrs. Thompson, what changes are you considering? He asked with appropriate concern about major estate planning decisions made during family conflict. I want to remove Richard completely from my inheritance and redirect my entire estate to benefit the residents of Sunset Manor and other elderly people who are being exploited or abandoned by family members who view them as burdens rather than understanding their worth and dignity, I explained. That's a substantial change that would affect $8.2 million in assets, Mr. Marshall said. Can you tell me what's prompted this decision? I explained Richard's behavior during my health crisis, his manipulation and misrepresentation of my condition. To justify institutional placement, his refusal to respect my autonomy and medical advice, and his willingness to abandon caregiving responsibilities by forcing me into institutional care against my will. He's demonstrated that he views me as a burden to be managed rather than a family member deserving care and respect, I concluded. He's made assumptions about my financial helplessness that have led him to make decisions that serve his convenience rather than my well-being. Mrs. Thompson, are you certain you want to proceed with these changes? Mr. Marshall asked. Estate planning decisions made during family conflict can sometimes be regretted later if relationships improve. I'm absolutely certain, I replied. Richard has shown his true character when he believed I was vulnerable and dependent on his support. He doesn't deserve to benefit from wealth that he would undoubtedly squander while continuing to view elderly family members as inconvenient obligations. The estate planning changes were completed over the weekend, while Richard and Karen were making final arrangements for my forced relocation to Sunset Manor and congratulating themselves on successfully manipulating an elderly family member into accepting institutional care that served their interests rather than my well-being. My new will directed the entire $8.2 million inheritance to a charitable trust that would provide financial assistance to elderly people facing family exploitation, fund improvements to understaffed institutional care facilities, and support research into elder abuse prevention and advocacy services. Richard would inherit nothing, and the inheritance would instead benefit thousands of elderly people who faced situations similar to mine. Family members who assumed they were financially helpless and could be abandoned or exploited without consequences. Monday morning, December 9th, 2024, Richard and Karen arrived at my house with moving trucks and facility transport, expecting to find me packed and ready for forced relocation to Sunset Manor despite my consistent objections and refusal to consent to institutional placement. Instead, they found me waiting in my living room with my estate attorney, a representative from Adult Protective Services, whom I had contacted about family coercion and misrepresentation of my condition, and Dr. Hernandez, who had agreed to provide medical testimony about my recovery and capacity for independent living. Mom, what's going on? Richard asked when he saw the assembled professionals who were obviously not there to facilitate my institutional placement. Richard, I'm not moving to institutional care, I announced calmly. I've canceled your arrangements, forfeited your deposits, and contacted appropriate authorities about your attempts to force institutional placement against my will and contrary to medical advice. But Mom, we've made all the arrangements, Karen protested. The facility is expecting you, and we've paid deposits that can't be refunded. The deposits you paid without my consent for institutional care I never agreed to accept, I corrected. Those financial losses are consequences of your decision to proceed with arrangements that I explicitly refused. Mrs. Thompson has been clear about her desire to remain in independent living, Dr. Hernandez explained to Richard and Karen. Her medical condition supports independent living, and there are no clinical indications for institutional care at this time. Furthermore, the Adult Protective Services representative added, elderly people have the right to make their own living arrangements when they retain decision-making capacity, regardless of family preferences or convenience. Richard's face revealed shock, confusion, and growing anger as he realized that his assumptions about my helplessness and inability to resist his institutional placement plans had been completely wrong. Mom, we're just trying to help you, he said defensively. We thought institutional care would be safer and better for your well-being. Richard, if you were trying to help me, you would have respected my clearly expressed preferences, followed medical advice supporting independent living, and provided temporary family support during my recovery, rather than immediately looking for ways to abandon caregiving responsibilities, I replied. But Mom, we didn't abandon you, Karen protested. We found you a nice facility with professional care. You found the cheapest institutional option available and misrepresented my condition to ensure my acceptance into memory care that I don't need, I corrected. That's abandonment disguised as care. And Richard, I continued, your behavior during my health crisis has taught me everything I need to know about your priorities and character when you believe family members are vulnerable and financially dependent on your support. What do you mean? Richard asked, clearly sensing that this conversation was heading toward consequences he hadn't anticipated. I mean that your assumptions about my financial situation and inability to defend myself against your manipulation have been completely incorrect, I explained. And those assumptions have led you to make decisions that will affect your future in ways you never imagined. I then revealed my $8.2 million inheritance and explained how Richard's behavior during my apparent vulnerability had demonstrated that he viewed elderly family members as burdens to be managed, rather than people deserving care and respect. You inherited $8.2 million? Richard asked with shock and disbelief. I inherited $8.2 million 9 months ago and have been observing how you would treat me when you believed I was financially dependent and unable to compensate you for caregiving, I explained. Your response has been educational about your true character and priorities. The silence that followed was profound as Richard and Karen processed the realization that their assumptions about my financial helplessness had led them to make decisions that revealed their true character, while I was secretly controlling wealth beyond their imagination. Mom, we didn't know about your inheritance, Karen said desperately. If we had known you could afford better care options, we would have made different recommendations. Karen, the quality of care you recommend for elderly family members shouldn't depend on their ability to pay for it, I replied. Family loyalty and respect for autonomy shouldn't be conditional on financial compensation. But Mom, we can change our approach, Richard pleaded, beginning to understand that his behavior had consequences he hadn't anticipated. Now that we know about your inheritance, we can provide better family support and respect your preferences about independent living. Richard, the time for providing better family support was during my health crisis when you believed I needed help, I said. You can't retroactively demonstrate character and family loyalty after learning about inheritance that makes me financially valuable to you. What are you saying? Richard asked with growing desperation. I'm saying that I've removed you completely from my will and redirected my entire inheritance to benefit elderly people who face family exploitation similar to what you attempted to do to me, I announced. The impact of this news was immediate and devastating. Richard had lost access to $8.2 million because he had assumed his mother was financially helpless and could be abandoned in institutional care without consequences. Mom, you can't disinherit me over a misunderstanding about care options, Richard protested. It wasn't a misunderstanding, I corrected. It was a deliberate attempt to force institutional placement against my will and contrary to medical advice because you didn't want to provide temporary family support during my recovery. But we thought it was best for your safety, Karen argued. You thought it was best for your convenience, I replied. Safety was your justification for abandoning caregiving responsibilities, not your actual motivation. Over the following weeks, Richard and Karen made numerous attempts to convince me to reverse my estate planning changes, using every manipulation tactic they had employed during my health crisis. They tried guilt. Mom, we're your only family. You're punishing us for trying to help you. They tried bargaining. What if we provide better family support going forward? Can we earn back our inheritance status? They tried financial pressure. Without inheritance, we can't afford the lifestyle we've planned or the children's college education. They tried emotional manipulation. You're destroying our family and our future security over a disagreement about care options. But I had learned through my health crisis that manipulation tactics only work when the target feels vulnerable, dependent, or guilty. I no longer felt any of those things. My health had recovered completely with Dr. Hernandez confirming full return to cognitive function and clearance for all normal activities, including driving. I was no longer dependent on their conditional support or attention, and I felt no guilt about protecting my inheritance from people who had proven they would exploit my vulnerability for their convenience. My estate planning decisions reflect the reality of your character and priorities as demonstrated during my health crisis, I told them during our last conversation about inheritance changes. They're based on your actual behavior when you believed I was vulnerable, not on your promises about future behavior now that you know I'm wealthy. 6 months after my health crisis, Richard and Karen's attempts to maintain contact, gradually, decreased as they realized that my estate planning changes were permanent and that I was no longer a source of inheritance expectations or financial support. My health recovery was complete with no lasting effects from the temporary symptoms that had created my vulnerability. But more importantly, the health crisis had provided invaluable education about family relationships and the difference between genuine care and exploitative manipulation disguised as concern. The Sunset Manor facility received a $2 million donation from my inheritance to improve staffing, upgrade facilities, and provide enhanced care for residents whose families had abandoned them in understaffed institutions. The remaining $6.2 million funded a charitable trust providing legal advocacy, financial assistance, and elder abuse prevention services for elderly people facing family exploitation. My new will ensures that my wealth will benefit thousands of elderly people who face situations similar to mine. Families who assume they are financially helpless and can be exploited or abandoned without consequences. Today, at 73 years old, I am healthy, independent, and surrounded by friends and charitable organizations that provide genuine care and support without expecting inheritance benefits in return. My estate planning reflects my values and priorities, rather than the manipulative demands of family members who proved they couldn't be trusted during my most vulnerable moment. The institutional placement that seemed so urgent when Richard believed I was broke and helpless proved to be the most expensive mistake of his life. His decision to prioritize his convenience over my well-being cost him more money than most people earn in several lifetimes. Sometimes the cheapest nursing home leads to the most expensive lesson about assuming elderly parents are financially powerless and can be abandoned without consequences. If you're watching this story and recognizing similar patterns in your own family relationships, I want you to know that you have more power than you might realize. Health crises don't mean you have to accept exploitation, manipulation, or abandonment. From family members who view your vulnerability as their opportunity to eliminate caregiving responsibilities through institutional placement that serves their convenience rather than your well-being. You have the right to expect genuine family support during medical recovery without being coerced into institutional care that you don't want or need. You have the right to have your autonomy and preferences respected when you retain decision-making capacity, regardless of family members' assumptions about what would be more convenient for them. You have the right to make your own living arrangements based on medical advice and personal preferences rather than family pressure or manipulation. And you have the right to modify estate planning and inheritance arrangements based on how family members actually treat you during health crises, including through financial consequences that reflect the cost of their betrayal and abandonment. Trust me when I tell you that sometimes the most empowering thing you can do is allow family members to experience the financial consequences of assuming elderly relatives are helpless and can be exploited without repercussions. The estate planning changes I made weren't punishment. They were education about the true cost of prioritizing personal convenience over family loyalty, and the expense of assuming that elderly parents are financially powerless and unable to defend themselves against manipulation and abandonment. Richard learned that elderly family members who appear vulnerable may actually control substantial resources and have the power to reward genuine care or punish exploitation and betrayal through inheritance decisions that reflect their true character and priorities. The $8.2 million inheritance that Richard lost will now provide assistance to thousands of elderly people facing similar family exploitation, fund improvements to understaffed care facilities, and support advocacy services that protect vulnerable adults from manipulation and abandonment by family members who view them as burdens rather than recognizing their worth and dignity. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for future generations of elderly people is to demonstrate that exploiting vulnerability and assuming financial helplessness can result in consequences more expensive than most people can imagine. What would you have done if your family tried to force you into institutional care against your will while assuming you were financially helpless? Have you ever been exploited by family members who made assumptions about your vulnerability and inability to defend yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know if this story has inspired you to examine your own estate planning and family relationship dynamics. And if you found this story of reclaiming power and demanding genuine care during health vulnerability resonating with you, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more stories of people who chose dignity and autonomy when others tried to exploit their apparent helplessness. Sometimes the cheapest nursing home placement can lead to the most expensive education about the cost of assuming elderly parents are financially powerless, and the warmest appreciation for the thousands of elderly people who will now benefit from resources that were almost wasted on family members who demonstrated they didn't deserve the privilege of inheritance through their actions during times of perceived vulnerability. Remember, your worth isn't determined by your apparent financial situation. Your power doesn't disappear during health crises, and your inheritance decisions should reflect the true character of people who claim to care about you when they believe you have nothing to offer in return. Thank you for watching, and remember, never underestimate the power of an elderly person who appears vulnerable but is actually in complete control of resources that could change your life forever, especially when your treatment of them during their apparent helplessness determines whether you'll benefit from those resources or whether they'll be redirected to people who actually deserve them. The nursing home that Richard thought would solve his caregiving inconvenience became the most expensive mistake of his life, and the inheritance he assumed was his birthright became a charitable legacy that will benefit thousands of elderly people who face similar exploitation and abandonment. Sometimes justice comes with interest, compounded over decades of wealth, building and payable in full to those who demonstrate that elderly family members deserve respect, dignity, and genuine care, regardless of their apparent financial situation or ability to compensate family members for their attention and support. Up next, You've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.